The first thing Caleb Turner smelled that morning wasn't coffee. It was blood. He sat up fast, instincts snapping awake like they had years ago when he was still a ranger patrolling Montana's endless forests. For a second, he thought it was just a dream, until he saw it. A thin trail of red leading across his wooden floorboards toward the bedroom wall. He followed it, barefoot, breath steaming in the cold. When he lifted the edge of the bed skirt, the light from his flashlight found something that didn't belong in this quiet mountain cabin. A child, no more than 6, curled tight in fear, her eyes wide and wet. And next to her, a German shepherd, bleeding from the shoulder, teeth bared, guarding her with the last of his strength. Caleb should have called for help. He should have stepped back. But instead, something deep in him, something older than training and stronger than fear, told him to stay. That morning, in a house meant for one, a broken man found 2 lives he couldn't walk away from. The mountains held their breath before dawn. Outside, the pine trees stood silent beneath a skin of frost, and the air was so cold that even sound seemed to freeze mid-air. Inside the small log cabin halfway up the ridge, the only thing moving was the slow, rhythmic tick of a wall clock and the occasional pop of wood in the stove. Caleb Turner woke to that silence, and to something else. A strange, metallic scent clung to the air. At first, his foggy mind could not place it. He lay there a moment longer, wrapped in the heavy quilts his late wife had stitched decades ago, listening to the wind hum faintly through the cracks of the old cabin. For a few heartbeats, everything felt as it always did. The loneliness, the chill, the stillness of a man long accustomed to waking up alone. Then his senses caught up. The smell, iron, copper, blood. Caleb's eyes opened fully. The haze of sleep vanished, replaced by an alertness so sharp it almost hurt. His years as a park ranger, 30 of them, had taught him that smell far too well. He'd caught it on the breeze when elk were brought down by wolves, when bears tore open carcasses, when men were seared miles from help. It was the scent of danger, of injury, of something gone wrong. He pushed himself upright slowly, joints creaking like the cabin's old boards. The dim gray of dawn pressed through the frosted windows. Nothing seemed out of place. The same pine dresser, the same shelf of field journals and framed photographs of his wife and son, both gone now. But then, at the edge of the bed, something dark caught his eye. A stain, thin and irregular, smeared faintly across the floorboards like someone had dragged a wet paintbrush across the wood. Caleb frowned. The stove's warmth hadn't reached this part of the room yet, and when his bare feet touched the floor, the chill bit hard. He leaned down, squinting. The stain wasn't old. It glistened faintly in the half-light. He crouched, slow, steady, like he was back in the field again, and followed the streak toward the far side of the bed. It disappeared beneath the frame. For a long moment, he simply stared at the darkness under the bed. A memory surfaced. Years ago, when he'd tracked a wounded mountain lion into a cave, knowing it was cornered and terrified. That same pulse of instinct stirred in him now. He reached for the flashlight on the nightstand, thumbed it on, and angled the beam low. The light cut through dust and shadow, and landed on eyes. 2 small, glistening eyes staring straight at him. Caleb froze. His breath hitched. The pupils were wide, reflecting the beam like tiny mirrors. At first, his brain tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Animal? Predator? But then, a faint sound reached him. Not a growl, not a hiss, a whimper. Human. He leaned closer. Beneath the bed, pressed against the wall, was a little girl, no more than 6 years old. Her face was pale beneath streaks of dirt, her tangled hair clinging to her cheeks. One hand clutched the scruff of a large dog beside her, a German shepherd, its sides heaving in shallow, uneven breaths. Blood darkened its fur along the shoulder. For a heartbeat, the three of them simply existed there, man, child, and animal, suspended in disbelief. Caleb slowly lowered the flashlight, trying to soften the light. His voice, when it came, was rough with disuse. "Hey there," he said quietly. "It's okay. You're safe." The girl didn't move. Her eyes darted toward the open door behind him, calculating escape. The dog gave a low, warning rumble. Not a snarl, but a sound born of exhaustion and duty. Caleb recognized it. Protection. Loyalty. Even, dying, the animal was ready to defend her. He raised both hands slightly, palms open. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." Silence stretched out. The wood stove ticked. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted once, distant and hollow. Caleb's mind ran through possibilities. Lost hikers, accident victims. But the snowstorm last night had sealed off the trail. No one should have been up here. His gut told him something darker was at play. The smell of blood was stronger now. The shepherd's wound wasn't just a scrape. It was deep, likely a gunshot. The girl's sleeve was torn, her tiny fingers trembling as she tried to keep pressure on the dog's injury with a scrap of cloth. Something inside Caleb shifted. That old dormant instinct to protect, to fix, to save. It had been years since he'd felt it. Years since there was anyone left to save. He took a slow step backward, giving them space. "I'm going to get some water and a blanket," he murmured, his tone as gentle as if he were talking to a fawn. "You stay right there." No answer. Only those frightened eyes watching him as he moved toward the kitchen. He filled a bowl from the kettle, grabbed one of the wool blankets from the couch, and came back carefully. When he knelt again, he placed the bowl just within reach. Steam curled up into the cold morning air. The little girl's gaze flickered to it, then back to him. The dog's nose twitched. "Go on," he said softly. "It's warm." After a long pause, she reached out a trembling hand and slid the bowl closer. The shepherd lapped at it weakly, pink tongue leaving faint ripples. Caleb exhaled slowly, relief loosening the knot in his chest. "You did good," he said to her, keeping him alive like that. Her lip trembled, but she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper so fragile he almost missed it. "Please, don't tell anyone." The words hit him harder than he expected. He didn't answer. Not yet. He just sat there, cross-legged on the cold floor. The flashlight dimmed to a soft glow between them. The early light through the window painted the room gold and gray. Caleb studied her. The dirt beneath her nails, the raw red on her wrists, the way she flinched every time the wind rattled the shutters. Whatever had driven her here wasn't just fear of the cold. It was fear of something worse. He could feel the weight of choice pressing against him already, though he didn't know it yet, the beginning of everything that would follow. For now, he only said, "You're safe for tonight." Outside, dawn finally broke over the ridge, light spilling across snow, glinting like shards of glass. Inside the cabin, the old ranger sat on the floor beside his bed, watching over a bleeding dog and a trembling child, wondering how fate had carried them beneath his roof, and why, for the first time in years, his heart was beating fast again. The girl flinched when Caleb moved closer, her tiny frame tightening like a trapped bird's. He slowed his breathing, kneeling so his eyes were level with the bed frame. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're hurt. Let me help." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, when the German shepherd tried to shift and whimpered in pain, she made a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. Carefully, she slid out from beneath the bed, dragging the dog by its collar. The blanket of dust and fear clung to both of them. Caleb's heart clenched. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, her lips cracked and blue from cold. The dog, big, muscular, and clearly trained, pressed against her protectively, every instinct in its battered body focused on keeping her safe. "Easy, boy," Caleb murmured, holding his palms open. "No one's gonna hurt her." The shepherd's amber eyes tracked his every movement, sharp but exhausted. The low rumble in its chest faded, as if it recognized something in his tone. A man who'd lived too long with silence and didn't intend to break it with violence. Caleb reached for the wool blanket he'd brought and wrapped it gently around the girl's shoulders. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Maya." "Okay, Maya. I'm Caleb." He glanced at the dog. "And this brave fella?" She looked down at the shepherd, managed a shaky whisper. "Rex." The name suited him. Short, solid, loyal. Caleb gave a small nod. "Rex. Got it." He led them to the living room where the fire still glowed low in the stove. The girl stayed close to the dog's side, one hand tangled in its fur. The smell of blood followed them, sharp and raw. Caleb fetched his old first aid kit, the same one he'd carried through wildfires and rescue missions years ago. His fingers shook as he opened it, partly from cold, partly from something heavier. He hadn't tended to anyone in years. The last person he'd tried to save hadn't made it. His wife lost to cancer before the mountains could save her. He knelt beside the dog. "I'm going to take a look at your friend here, all right?" he said to Maya. "It might hurt him a little, but I'll be careful." She nodded, biting her lip. Caleb cut away the matted fur around the wound. Blood welled up sluggishly, deep, but not fatal if he could clean it. "Looks like a bullet graze," he muttered. "Lucky boy." Rex didn't flinch when Caleb pressed gauze to the shoulder, just gave a low huff through his nose. The intelligence in the dog's eyes unnerved him. It was as if the animal understood every word. He worked quietly, cleaning the wound with warm water, applying antiseptic, then binding it with layers of cloth. Each movement was deliberate, practiced. The smell of iodine filled the room, mixing with the scent of smoke and pine sap from the stove. When he finally sat back, his knees popping, Rex lay still but calmer, his breathing steadier. "There," Caleb said, voice rough. "That should hold for now." Maya's eyes shimmered with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb gave a short nod, wiping his hands on a towel. "You two been out there all night?" She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the floorboards. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his back, and reached for his phone on the counter. "We need to call the sheriff," he said. "You're hurt. He'll want to know what happened. Maybe your parents are looking." "No!" The word tore out of her throat like a scream. She lunged forward, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Please don't call them. They'll find us. Tomt for Huns." Her voice cracked on the last word, and tears sprang to her eyes. She pressed both hands over her mouth as if she'd said too much. Caleb froze. "Find you," he repeated quietly. "Who?" She shook her head, trembling. "Please, don't make me go back, please." Rex pushed up on his front legs, a protective growl rising from deep in his chest. The girl buried her face in his neck, sobbing. Caleb's stomach dropped. This wasn't a lost child situation. This was something darker. He could feel it in the air, like the electricity before a storm. He set the phone down slowly. "Maya," he said, kneeling again. "Listen to me. You're safe right now, okay? No one's coming through that door tonight. But I need to understand what's going on." She didn't respond, only clutched the dog tighter. He exhaled, rubbing a hand across his jaw. Years of dealing with frightened hikers and wounded animals had taught him one thing. Trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned. So he made a decision without thinking too hard about it. The kind of decision that changed everything. Caleb walked to the window, stared out at the pale wash of dawn spilling over the ridgeline. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass. In the distance, the forest seemed endless, indifferent, eternal. He thumbed the power button on his phone. The screen went dark. The click sounded final, almost ceremonial. When he turned back, Maya was watching him through swollen eyes. "I'm not calling anyone," he said quietly. "You're safe here." Something in her posture shifted, the tiniest flicker of belief. She nodded once as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. Caleb knelt beside the stove, adding another log to the fire. Sparks leapt upward, painting the room in warm light. "You both need food," he said, "and rest." Maya hesitated. "Are you gonna make us leave?" "Not tonight." The girl blinked hard, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. Then, as if the fight drained out of her all at once, she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Caleb." He busied himself at the counter, pouring water into a pot, cracking open a can of soup, anything to keep from showing how deeply her words had landed. Behind him, the sound of soft breathing filled the cabin. Rex settling down again, the girl curling up beside him. Caleb turned off the light, leaving only the glow of the fire. He stood in the doorway for a long while, staring at the two figures lying together on the rug, haloed by orange light. The old ache in his chest felt different tonight. Less like grief, more like something fragile and unfamiliar trying to grow in its place. He whispered to the empty air, to the ghosts of his wife and son, to the God he hadn't spoken to in years. "What am I doing?" No answer came. Only the crackle of fire, the steady rhythm of snow against glass, and the quiet presence of two lost souls who had somehow found their way to him. Caleb sat down in his worn chair, watching over them as sleep claimed the cabin. Somewhere deep inside, the protector in him stirred. The part of himself he thought had died with his family, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. The storm that had blanketed the mountains finally broke 3 days later. The world outside Caleb's cabin turned to blinding white, snow glittering beneath a hard blue sky. For the first time in years, he heard laughter, small and shy like a bird testing its wings. Maya stood near the porch, wrapped in one of Caleb's old wool coats that nearly swallowed her whole. She was staring at the snow as if seeing it for the first time, the way sunlight made it sparkle, how the flakes melted on her glove. Beside her, Rex sat upright, his fur clean and his bandaged shoulder tucked carefully against his body. Caleb watched them from the doorway, coffee steaming in his hands. For days now, his cabin had changed in ways he hadn't thought possible. There were footprints in the snow that weren't his, 2 bowls beside his own, laughter where there used to be silence. Even the walls seemed to breathe differently, as if the place had finally remembered what life sounded like. "Cold?" he called. Maya turned, nose red, eyes bright. "No, it's pretty." He smiled despite himself. "Pretty can still freeze you to death if you don't know what you're doing." She tilted her head. "You're gonna teach me, right?" The way she said it, not as a question, but as trust, caught him off guard. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Yeah, I'll teach you." That afternoon, he showed her how to light a fire from nothing but flint and dry bark. They crouched near the stove, Rex lying close by with his head on his paws, watching them with sleepy eyes. "Fire's alive," Caleb said, striking the flint. Sparks danced, fading before they hit the wood. "You gotta treat it like something wild. Give it air, but not too much. Feed it, but don't smother it." Maya nodded solemnly, her little hands clumsy but eager. She mimicked his movements, and when a thin tongue of flame finally caught, she gasped. "I did it!" "Time comes." Caleb chuckled, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. "You did." They watched the flame grow, warm light flickering over her face. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes reflecting the fire. "Most people think survival's about strength," he said quietly. "But it's really about patience, listening, paying attention to what the world's telling you." "Like what?" "Like when snow goes quiet before a storm, or when birds stop singing, means a predator's close. Out here, everything speaks. You just gotta learn the language." Maya looked thoughtful. "Do you think Rex knows the language?" Caleb glanced at the dog. "He knows it better than both of us put together." At the mention of his name, Rex lifted his head. Caleb gave a soft whistle. "Come." The dog hesitated, then stood, limping only slightly, and patted over. "Good boy," Caleb murmured. "Stay." Rex stopped, eyes on him. His tail gave a slow, cautious wag. Maya grinned. "He listened to you." Caleb shrugged, but his lips twitched. "Guess he's starting to believe I'm not the bad guy." Over the next few days, the cabin fell into a rhythm. Quiet, steady, human. Caleb taught Maya how to melt snow for water, how to tell the difference between animal tracks in the drifts outside. Together, they followed the delicate prints of a hare one morning until they vanished beneath a spruce. "See that?" he said, kneeling. "Coyote got her. You can tell by the drag marks." Maya frowned, tracing the marks with her mitten. "That's sad." "Yeah," Caleb said softly. "But it's the way of things. You can't survive the wild if you don't understand what it takes to live in it." When she looked up at him, he saw the question forming in her eyes. the one she hadn't dared to ask since she arrived. What does it take to live? He didn't have the answer. Maybe he was still figuring that out himself. That evening, as snow began to fall again, Caleb cooked rabbit stew. The smell filled the cabin, rich, comforting. Maya sat at the table with Rex's head in her lap, absently stroking his fur. The firelight painted them both gold, and for the first time in 5 years, Caleb felt something he thought he'd buried with his family. Warmth that wasn't just from the fire. He served her a bowl. "Eat up. You need the strength." She took a spoonful and smiled shyly. "You cook good." "Years of practice," he said. "Had to, or I'd starve." "Did your wife like your cooking?" The question landed softly, but deep. Caleb hesitated, staring at the steam rising from his bowl. "She did," he said after a pause. "She said I made the best chili in Montana." "What happened to her?" "She got sick. A long time ago." Maya's spoon stilled. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Me too." For a while, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, soft and low, like the forest breathing. Then Maya said quietly, "I think your cabin was lonely before we came." Caleb looked up. She wasn't teasing. She was simply stating a truth. "Yeah," he said finally. "It was." Rex thumped his tail once, as if agreeing. Later that night, when the fire burned low, Caleb stood by the window, looking out at the moonlight spilling across the snow. Behind him, Maya slept on the couch, Rex curled at her feet. The sound of their breathing filled the cabin, steady, peaceful. He thought of how strange life was, how 3 broken things could somehow fit together and make something whole again. The emptiness he'd lived with for years didn't feel so heavy anymore. He turned back toward them, whispering more to himself than anyone else. "You're safe here, both of you." Rex stirred, opening one amber eye. Caleb smiled faintly. "Yeah, you heard me." The dog's tail brushed the floor twice before he drifted back to sleep. Caleb sat down in his old chair by the fire, hands folded loosely in his lap. The flames threw soft light across the walls, over the worn photographs, the empty mugs, the forgotten maps of trails he once patrolled. All of it felt different now. The house was still old, still quiet, but no longer hollow. In the space between heartbeat and breath, the mountains seemed to exhale, as if welcoming him back to the living world. And for the first time since his wife died, Caleb Turner closed his eyes with a sense of peace instead of dread. Tomorrow he would teach Maya how to set traps, how to listen to the forest, how to trust her instincts. But tonight, he simply let himself rest, warmed by the crackle of the fire, the gentle breathing of a child and her dog, and the small miracle of feeling needed again. The wind rose without warning that night, a low, moaning howl that clawed across the mountains like something alive. Snow battered the windows of Caleb's cabin, plastering the glass in white. The fire cracked and hissed as if trying to keep the storm at bay. Inside, shadows trembled along the log walls. Caleb had fallen asleep in his chair, a blanket across his knees, the taste of coffee long gone cold on the table beside him. Rex slept by the hearth, his breathing slow and steady. Maya lay curled on the couch, wrapped in quilts. For hours, the cabin felt cocooned in peace, the kind that only existed between storms. Then a scream shattered it. Caleb jerked upright. The kind of scream that comes from the gut, pure terror, the kind that doesn't think, only remembers. He was on his feet in an instant, heart hammering. "Maya!" The little girl thrashed in her sleep, eyes squeezed shut, hands clawing at the air as if fighting off invisible hands. "No, don't! Please, Rex!" The dog was already up, limping toward her, whining. Caleb knelt beside the couch, his voice rough but gentle. Hey, it's okay. You're safe. You're safe, sweetheart." Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then she saw him, the firelight behind him, the snow at the window, and slowly the panic drained from her face. "Caleb," she whispered, trembling. "I'm here," he said, brushing the hair from her damp forehead. It was just a bad dream. But he knew better. That kind of fear didn't come from a dream. It came from memory. She sat up, clutching the quilt around her shoulders, tears streaking her cheeks. Rex pressed close, resting his head on her knees. She buried her fingers in his fur, grounding herself. For a long time, the only sound was the storm. Caleb didn't push. He just sat on the floor beside her, the firelight flickering over both their faces. Finally, she spoke, voice so soft he had to lean close to hear. They were hunting us." Caleb stilled. "Who?" She looked down, eyes wide and hollow. "The men. The ones with trucks. They said they were taking us to a new home, but they lied." He swallowed hard. "You mean, you weren't alone?" "There were others," she whispered. "Kids, younger than me. We were in a big room with no windows. They said we had to be quiet, or the bad men would get mung." Caleb felt his stomach twist. The world had cruelty. He'd seen it. Poachers, smugglers, men who thought wilderness was theirs to exploit. But this was worse. "How did you get away?" Maya's eyes flicked toward Rex. "Him." Caleb looked at the shepherd, whose gaze met his, steady and unblinking. "They put us in a van one night," she continued, her words trembling. "It smelled bad, like gas and metal. One of the men tried to grab me when I cried. Rex bit him, hard. The others yelled, and then there was a loud noise." She mimed a gun with her fingers, flinching. "He got hurt, but he didn't stop. He pulled me out the door, and we ran." Her small voice cracked. "We ran until I couldn't breathe. I just kept holding his fur and running. Then it got dark, then cold, and then your house." The room went very still. Caleb didn't speak right away. His hands curled into fists on his knees, nails digging into skin. He could see it. The headlights slicing through trees, a wounded dog dragging a terrified child through the snow, the echo of gunfire swallowed by wind. He looked at Maya, her fragile shoulders, her two large eyes, and something inside him broke open. "They hurt you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "They tried, but Rex didn't let them." Caleb's throat burned. He reached out, resting a calloused hand gently over hers. "You're safe now," he said. "They're not going to find you, not while I'm breathing." The words came out rougher than he meant, edged with something old and fierce. Maya stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to believe him. Then she nodded once, her tiny hand gripping his like a lifeline. "I believe you." Rex made a soft sound, as if approving the pact. Caleb glanced toward the window, snow swirling so thick it erased the world outside. Somewhere in that endless white, monsters wore human faces and hunted children through back roads the law never bothered to patrol. He'd seen men like them before when he'd been younger and wore the badge of the National Ranger Service. Men who trapped, poached, and vanished into the wilderness when the law came sniffing. But this wasn't about animals. This was worse. This was evil hiding in the woods he once swore to protect. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the memory of what it meant to take a stand. He thought of his son, of how he used to teach him about right and wrong, how to follow a trail, how to never turn your back when someone needed help. And then he thought of his wife's voice, soft and tired near the end. "You can't save everyone, Caleb. Maybe not everyone, but maybe this one." He rose, stoked the fire, and threw another log in hard enough to send sparks spiraling up the chimney. Maya flinched at the noise. "Did I do something wrong?" He turned back quickly. No, not you." His voice softened. "You did everything right. You survived." She looked down at Rex, stroking his fur. "He saved me." Caleb crouched beside the dog and ran a hand over its head. "He's a hero," he said. "A damn good one." Rex's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the cabin walls. But inside, the fire burned hotter, brighter, as if feeding off the rage and resolve that now filled the old ranger's chest. He stared into the flames, his reflection flickering there, and made a silent vow. No one's taking her back. If the world had turned its back on this child, then the mountains would protect her, and he would be their instrument. For the first time in years, Caleb Turner felt alive. Not peaceful, not healed, but alive with purpose. He looked at Maya one last time before turning down the lamp. "Get some rest, kiddo. The storm will be gone by morning." She nodded, curling against Rex's side, the dog's body shielding her from everything the dark still held. As Caleb watched them drift into sleep, he whispered into the crackle of fire, not a prayer, but a promise. "Over my dead body." The days after the blizzard were almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start to hear your own heartbeat. The world around Caleb's cabin glowed under a thin veil of new snow, sunlight spilling through pine branches like shards of glass. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. Caleb stepped outside just after dawn, breath ghosting in the cold air. He'd risen early, as always, to chop wood and check the traps near the creek. But the instant he stepped onto the porch, something prickled in his gut. That old, familiar tightening that used to mean something's wrong. He crouched, eyes scanning the frozen ground. There, near the edge of the clearing, a set of tracks cutting across the fresh snow. Boot prints, heavy ones, too deep for hikers, too close to his cabin. Caleb followed them slowly to where the narrow access road twisted through the trees. The snow there was marked by something else. Deep grooves, uneven, filled with frozen slush. He brushed a glove over one. Tire marks. He stared at them for a long moment, breath fogging in the icy air. The nearest town was 20 miles south. Nobody drove up this far, unless they had a reason. He turned his head slightly, listening. The forest was too still. No birdsong, no squirrels scurrying through branches. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. He straightened and looked toward the ridgeline. From here, his cabin was hidden by the trees, smoke from the chimney barely visible. Anyone driving the road wouldn't see it until they were nearly on top of it, which meant whoever had come this way either knew it was here or was searching. Caleb's pulse began to hammer. He crouched again, studying the prints. 2 different sets of boots. One lighter, maybe a woman or a smaller man. The other large, heavy, with a distinct heel. Military-style tread. The pattern burned into his memory. He'd seen it on law enforcement, mercenaries, hunters. He followed them about 20 yards before they turned back toward the road. No sign of entry, no cigarette butts, no camp. But something about the way the snow was disturbed, how it circled near a fallen log, told him they'd stopped there. Watching his cabin. He felt the blood drain from his face. For a long moment, he stood there, staring at the forest shadows. He imagined headlights slicing through the trees, men with radios, quiet voices, the same kind Maya had described. They'd found the trail. When he came back inside, he closed the door softly and leaned against it, his breath shaking. Maya was at the table, tracing lines on an old map he'd given her, her small finger following the curves of rivers and ridges. Rex lay nearby, tail flicking lazily. But when Caleb entered, the dog's head came up, ears pricking sharply. "Morning?" Maya said without looking up. Caleb forced a smile. "Morning, kiddo." But Rex's gaze stayed locked on him, nostrils flaring. Caleb knelt beside the dog and rubbed the thick fur behind his neck. The muscles there were tense, rigid. Rex gave a low growl, not threatening, but warning. "Yeah," Caleb muttered under his breath. "You smell it too." He stood and crossed to the window. From here, he could see the tree line. Serene, snow-heavy, beautiful. But all he could think about were those tracks. He had no proof, but his gut didn't need proof. Something was coming. Over the next hour, he moved quietly around the cabin, preparing. He gathered a handful of old tin cans from the pantry, tied them together with twine, and strung them near the back porch, crude alarms that would rattle if anyone approached. He checked the shutters, reinforced the lock on the cellar door, made sure the kerosene lamps were full. Maya watched him from the table, frowning. "Why are you doing that?" "Just being careful," he said. "Like when you said to check the wind before lighting a fire?" "Exactly." He forced another smile. "Same idea." She nodded, pretending to believe him, but her eyes darted to the rifle leaning against the wall, the one he'd cleaned and oiled the night before. Caleb noticed her glance. "Don't worry. It's just for emergencies." Her voice was small. "Are we in danger?" He hesitated. The truth hovered in his throat, heavy as lead. "Not if I can help it." Rex got up and started pacing near the door, his nails clicking on the wooden floor. Every so often, he'd stop, ears high, tail stiff, staring toward the window as if hearing something Caleb couldn't. Caleb reached for the rifle and checked the chamber out of habit. Loaded. He ran his fingers along the stock, remembering the last time he'd used it, putting down a wounded bear that had stumbled too close to a campsite. He'd hated it then. He'd hate it more now. Still, his hands moved with practiced precision. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again over the peaks. The sky dimmed to the color of bruised metal. The forest, once alive with the creak and sigh of trees, went still again. Caleb set a small kettle of snow on the stove to melt and crouched beside Maya. "All right, listen," he said quietly. "If something happens, anything, and I tell you to hide, you go under the crawl space. Remember where I showed you?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Rex goes with you. Don't make a sound, not even a whisper. You wait until I come back. You understand?" Her lower lip trembled. "You'll come back, right?" He met her gaze. "Always." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he meant it all the same. She crawled into his lap without warning and hugged him tight. It startled him. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had held on to him like that. After a second, he wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her hair. "You're gonna be all right, kiddo," he murmured. "I promise." Rex whined softly, pressing against them both. When she finally fell asleep that night, Caleb stayed by the window, rifle resting across his knees. The wind had died, but the air carried a strange weight, like the mountain itself was waiting. He watched the tree line through the reflection of the glass. Every flicker of shadow made his pulse spike. Somewhere out there, men had stood in the snow, close enough to see the faint smoke from his chimney. Men who didn't belong. Men who were searching. He could almost feel them still, the echo of their presence, like the woods remembered their footsteps. Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle and whispered to the dark, "You come for her. You'll have to go through me first." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. Inside, the cabin waited, quiet as a held breath, the calm before the storm. The night fell thick and heavy over the mountains, the kind of blackness that swallowed sound, leaving only the faint hiss of wind moving through pines. Caleb had dozed off in his chair near the window, rifle across his lap. The fire burned down to glowing coals. Then, a noise. Not the shifting of wood or the moan of wind, but something foreign, mechanical. A crunch of snow. Then another. Caleb's eyes snapped open. Every nerve in his body went taut. He moved silently to the window and peeked through a gap in the curtain. 2 cones of light slashed across the clearing, flashlights, sweeping in slow, deliberate arcs. Voices murmured, low and male. He couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the rhythm. Search pattern. His breath turned to frost on the glass. "God damn it," he whispered under his breath. He turned. Maya was asleep on the couch. Rex curled tight beside her. The dog's head lifted instantly, ears pricked, eyes burning amber in the dim light. Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the girl, shaking her gently. "Maya," he whispered. "Wake up. Now." Her eyes blinked open, dazed. "What? No talking. We need to hide." The fear in his voice erased the questions from hers. She sat up fast, clutching the quilt. "Under the crawl space," he said quietly, helping her to her feet. "Just like we practiced." Rex was already standing, muscles rigid, low growl vibrating in his chest. Caleb ran a hand down the dog's back. "You stay with her, boy. You don't move until I say." Another sound. Closer this time. Boots crunching through snow. The rattle of the tin can alarm outside. They'd found the porch. Caleb lifted the rug near the stove and pulled open the small wooden hatch that led to the crawl space beneath the cabin. Cold air rushed up. Maya hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be fine." "But, no buts. Go." Her eyes filled with tears, but she obeyed, crawling down into the darkness. Rex followed, his body sliding into the narrow space, his head the last thing to disappear. Caleb closed the hatch, tugged the rug back over it, and straightened. Just as the knock came, a single, deliberate bang on the door, then another. "Hello!" a voice called out. Deep, confident, almost friendly. "Anyone home?" Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door. "Who's there?" he called, steady and flat. "Sorry to bother you, sir," the voice answered, still pretending civility. "We're part of a search party, looking for a missing child." Caleb's heart stuttered. The man's tone was wrong, too smooth, too sure, not like the real rangers he used to work with. He opened the door halfway, keeping his body behind it. The cold hit him like a slap. Two men stood outside, one tall and broad, with a scar running from temple to jaw, the other leaner, wearing a black jacket zipped up to his chin. Their flashlights swept across Caleb's face, momentarily blinding him. "Evening," Caleb said, voice dry as the mountain wind. "What kind of child?" The scarred man smiled thinly. "Little girl, dark hair, might have come through these woods." Caleb feigned confusion. "No kids out here. Just me. Haven't seen anyone since before the storm." "Mind if we come in?" the lean man asked, already stepping closer. "Actually, I do mind," Caleb said, steel creeping into his tone. "I've had enough strangers knocking on my door for one lifetime." The taller man's smile widened, cold and sharp. "Look, old-timer, we're just trying to help. You don't want to make this complicated." Caleb met his gaze without blinking. "You should leave." The man's jaw flexed. "Maybe we should take a look around anyway." And that was the moment when everything broke. Rex exploded from beneath the floorboards with a sound like thunder, wood splintering as he surged upward, snarling. He launched himself through the narrow gap, hitting the taller man square in the chest. The man's flashlight went spinning into the snow, beam tumbling wildly across the trees. The second man shouted, yanking a pistol from his jacket. Caleb fired first. The blast from the rifle filled the night, one deafening crack that shattered the calm. The shot hit the man's shoulder, spinning him backward into the porch railing. The taller man screamed, wrestling with Rex, trying to pry the dog off his arm. Snow sprayed as they struggled, blood dark against the white. Caleb worked the bolt of the rifle, chambered another round. But before he could fire, a shot went off. A flash from the man's sidearm. Rex yelped. "Maya!" Caleb shouted, his voice breaking. He swung the rifle and fired again. The bullet hit wood inches from the man's head, the shock sending him stumbling backward into the snow. He turned and ran, crashing through the trees, blood trailing behind. The other man lay sprawled near the steps, unconscious, his pistol half buried in the drift. For a long moment, the only sound was the echo of the gunfire fading into the mountains. Then, silence. Caleb's hands shook as he lowered the rifle. His breath came in harsh gasps, the cold cutting into his lungs. The air stank of gunpowder and blood. He dropped to his knees beside Rex. The shepherd was lying in the snow, sides, heaving, blood staining his fur. The bullet had grazed his flank. Not fatal, but deep. "Easy, boy," Caleb whispered, pressing his hands over the wound. "You're okay. You're okay." Rex whimpered softly, but didn't pull away. The hatch creaked open behind him. Maya crawled out, tears streaking her face. "Rex!" she cried, running to them. Caleb caught her before she could touch the wound. "He's hurt, but he'll live," he said quickly. "You need to stay back, honey." She shook her head, sobbing. "You said you'd be fine." "I am," he lied. His voice was low, strained. "I just need you to breathe, all right? You did perfect." She knelt beside Rex anyway, her small hand resting on his paw. The dog blinked at her weakly, tail thumping once in the snow. Caleb looked up, scanning the dark tree line. No movement. But he knew this wasn't over. One man was gone, and he'd come back with more. He reached out, brushed a tear from Maya's cheek with a shaking hand. "We're still here," he said softly. "That's what matters." Behind them, the cabin's window was shattered, snow drifting in. Smoke from the rifle hung heavy in the air. The old ranger stood there in the ruin of his peace, blood on his hands, heart hammering, and realized there was no turning back now. He wasn't just hiding them anymore. He was fighting for them. The days that followed were heavy and slow, an endless blur of pain, exhaustion, and quiet determination. The world outside Caleb's cabin had turned still again, buried under new snow. But inside, time seemed to move by the rhythm of breathing, of whispered reassurance, of the soft rustle of bandages being changed. Rex lay on the rug near the stove, his head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. Every so often, his tail thumped weakly against the floor when Maya's small hands brushed through his fur. The wound along his flank was healing, but slowly, and the infection had threatened to set in more than once. Caleb worked through his supplies until the kit was nearly empty. The antiseptic gone, the last roll of gauze unraveling in his weathered hands. He'd treated worse in his ranger days, but never like this. Never for something that felt this personal. "Hold the cloth steady," he murmured, squinting as he tied off the new bandage. Maya pressed her lips together, concentrating hard, her little fingers trembling as she did exactly as he said. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes tired, but she refused to rest until Rex was comfortable. "You're getting good at this," Caleb said softly. She glanced up at him. "You taught me." That simple statement hit harder than it should have. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth lined with exhaustion. "Guess I did." For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling and the wind brushing against the windows. Outside, dusk had begun to settle, the kind that painted everything in shades of blue and gold. Inside, the little cabin glowed warm, the smell of pine smoke and boiled herbs filling the air. When the bandage was finally secured, Caleb sat back on his heels with a sigh. "That'll hold." Maya smiled, a small, fleeting thing, but real. "He's brave." Caleb looked at Rex, whose amber eyes met his. "Yeah, he's tougher than most men I've met." Rex gave a quiet, approving grunt, earning a soft giggle from Maya. The sound made Caleb's chest tighten in an unfamiliar way, a warmth he'd forgotten existed. That night, after Maya had finally fallen asleep beside the dog, Caleb sat in his chair by the fire, staring at the bandages drying near the stove. His hands were raw and cracked from work, his body aching from sleepless nights. But the ache wasn't the worst part. It was the memories. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw fire, not from the hearth, but from years ago. Trees exploding into flames, the roar of wind and heat, the screaming of men. His son, Luke, a firefighter like his father, had been one of them. 23 years old, bright, fearless, burned alive trying to save a trapped family in the Bitterroot fires. Caleb had gotten the call at dawn. He could still remember the way his wife had dropped to her knees, the sound that tore from her throat, a sound he never forgot. And then, 2 years later, she was gone too. Cancer, quiet and cruel. He'd sold their house, retired early, moved up here into the mountains because he couldn't bear the world anymore. The silence had been his punishment, and his refuge both. Until now. He looked over at Maya, small, curled up beside Rex, her hand still resting on the dog's side. He didn't even notice when the words slipped out. Since then, I stopped saving things. Maya stirred, half asleep. What? He blinked, realizing he'd spoken aloud. Nothing. Go back to sleep. But she sat up anyway, rubbing her eyes. You said you stopped saving things. Caleb stared into the fire, jaw tight. Yeah, I did. Why? He hesitated. There were things he hadn't said, out loud in years, words that felt like ghosts when he tried to speak them. But the room was quiet, and something in Maya's voice, small but steady, gave him the courage to keep going. Because the last people I tried to save didn't make it, he said softly. My wife, my boy. I lost them both. After that, I figured the world didn't need me getting in the way anymore. Maya was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, You saved us. He looked up. Her eyes were glistening in the firelight, wide and full of something he couldn't name. You saved me and Rex. That counts, right? The words hit him harder than any bullet could. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, he reached for his coffee mug, empty, cold, and stared into it like it might give him answers. I don't know if I saved you, he said finally. I just didn't want to see you die. That's saving, she said, her voice small but sure. That's what heroes do. Caleb let out a shaky laugh, rubbing a hand across his face. Heroes? Nah, I'm just an old fool with a bad back. Then you're my hero with a bad back. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, he saw something other than loss reflected in another person's eyes. Hope. Before he could speak, she moved. Small arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his chest. For a second, he froze, startled by the suddenness of it, and then something inside him cracked open. He lifted a trembling hand and rested it on her back. The cabin was silent, except for the whisper of fire. When she finally let go, she wiped her nose on her sleeve and said matter-of-factly, You should rest too. I can watch Rex. Caleb smiled faintly, his throat tight. All right, Nurse Maya, but wake me if he stirs. I will. He stretched out on the couch, exhaustion pulling him under almost instantly. Before sleep claimed him, he felt something warm at his feet. Rex shifting closer, and heard the faintest sound of Maya humming under her breath. It was the first lullaby he'd heard in 5 years, and in that fragile moment, amid pain and loss and snow still falling outside, something began to heal in all three of them, not just wounds but hearts. The storm had passed, but the cold it left behind was merciless. The mountains glittered under the morning sun, sharp and clean, a beauty that hid its danger. For 3 days, Caleb, Maya, and Rex had lived in uneasy peace, The cabin still smelled faintly of smoke and antiseptic. Rex was healing. Maya was learning to laugh again. But on the fourth morning, Caleb felt it, that familiar tension in the air, a silence that didn't belong. He was chopping wood out back when he noticed the crows. They weren't circling, they were fleeing, black flecks darting across the pale sky toward the valley. The forest had gone too still, too fast. Then, faint but undeniable, the crunch of tires far down the ridge road. He froze, axe halfway to the block. The echo of engines, voices carried by the wind, they were coming back. Caleb dropped the axe and ran inside. "Maya, pack your coat, now!" Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She'd learned to read that tone. Low, steady, carved from fear. Rex was already on his feet, hackles raised, a faint growl rumbling deep in his chest. His side still bore the scar from the last fight, but his eyes were alert. Fierce. "Are they here?" Maya asked. "They found us," Caleb said. "We're leaving." He grabbed his old ranger pack from the closet. Flares, jerky, matches, a hunting knife, a water canteen. He tossed in a blanket and the last of the dried meat from the smokehouse. Within minutes, they were outside, the cabin door swinging behind them in the wind. The forest swallowed them whole. Caleb led the way, moving through the snow with silent precision. Every step was calculated, choosing drifts that wouldn't show deep footprints, weaving between dense pine trunks to break the line of sight. He'd patrolled these woods for 30 years. Every ridge, every creek bend, every fallen tree was a memory etched into his bones. Behind him, Maya followed quietly, her breath puffing in tiny clouds, clutching Rex's fur for balance. The dog moved at her side, head low, nostrils flaring as he scanned the air. They climbed the ridge and paused near a frozen stream. Caleb crouched, scanning the horizon. Through the trees below, movement. Black figures cutting through the snow. 4 of them. The one in front wore a dark coat, moving slower, favoring one leg. The surviving intruder. The man Rex had mauled. He'd brought friends. Caleb's stomach turned to ice. "Keep low," he whispered. Maya's hand tightened on his sleeve. "Where will we go?" "North, toward the old ranger outpost. They'll never find it under the ridge." "But it's far." "I know." He checked the wind direction, then motioned her forward. "Stay close to me. Don't run unless I tell you to." And Maya, he met her eyes. No sound. Not one. She nodded. They moved again, their figures ghost-like among the trees. The only sounds were the whisper of snow and the faint crunch beneath their boots. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, turning the forest blue. Twice Caleb stopped to listen, the faint hum of engines fading, then returning. The men had snowmobiles. They were sweeping the ridges, cutting across the terrain faster than Caleb could move on foot. He felt the old instincts kicking in, the part of him that once hunted poachers through these same woods. But now he was the one being hunted. He reached into his coat, pulled out a strip of venison, and handed it to Maya. "Eat. Small bites." She chewed quietly, eyes wide, pale, with cold. Rex sat beside her, ears twitching. Every so often, his gaze would dart toward the west, where the wind carried faint voices. When the echo of engines came again, so closer this time, Caleb's pulse spiked. "They're tracking us," he whispered. "We have to move." He led them down a ravine, sliding on his boots, using the trees to slow his descent. At the bottom lay a narrow frozen creek, a natural trail that curved toward the old ranger post. "Stay in the creek bed," he said. "No tracks." They moved quickly, the ice crunching underfoot. Snow began to fall again. Light at first, then heavier, thick flakes swirling in the dim light. It would cover their trail, but it also made the air colder, visibility worse. Rex stopped suddenly, muscles locking. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Caleb froze. "What is it, boy?" Rex's ears flattened. He stepped forward, nose testing the wind, tail stiff. Then, a sharp bark, deep and urgent. Caleb turned just as the sound of shouting split the air. Figures burst from the trees above the ravine, flashlights cutting through the snow. "Run!" Caleb hissed. He grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her forward. They sprinted down the creek, breath burning, hearts pounding. Gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets tearing through branches, splintering bark. "Faster!" Rex stayed behind them for a few steps, barking wildly, then veered suddenly left, toward the slope. "Rex, no!" Maya screamed, but the dog was already gone, his body a blur of motion in the snow. He bounded up the ridge, barking, drawing the men's attention. Gunfire shifted, shouts followed. He was luring them away. "Come on!" Caleb said, dragging Maya forward. "He's buying us time!" Tears streamed down her cheeks, freezing as they fell. "He'll get hurt!" "I'll get him back," Caleb promised. "I swear it." They ran until their lungs burned, until the shots faded into distance. Only then did Caleb slow, doubling over, panting. The world was silent again, except for Maya's quiet sobs and the wind through the trees. Then, another sound. A whine. "Rex." It came from somewhere ahead. Faint, pained. Caleb followed it, heart in his throat, until he saw him. The shepherd was trapped beneath a tangle of fallen logs, snow covering half his body. Blood streaked the snow where he'd slid down the slope. His eyes found Caleb immediately, pleading but fierce, still alive. "Oh God!" Caleb dropped to his knees, hands clawing at the wood. "Maya, help me clear it!" Together, they pulled at branches, heaving with every ounce of strength. The wood shifted, but the largest log wouldn't move. Gunfire echoed again in the distance, closer this time. "Come on!" Caleb grunted, his breath coming in gasps. "Come on, damn it!" He wedged his shoulder beneath the log, pushing until pain tore down his arm. The wood finally shifted, just enough. Rex dragged himself free, yelping. "Got you!" Caleb breathed. He pulled the dog close, cradling his head in his arms. Maya was crying openly now. "He saved us," she whispered. Caleb looked at her, at the tears freezing on her cheeks, the fear in her eyes, and felt something raw and fierce ignite inside him. "Then we save him." He lifted Rex into his arms, muscles trembling, and started up the trail toward the old outpost. Snow fell harder, wind biting, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Behind them, voices shouted in the distance. The hunt wasn't over. But for the moment, they were still alive. And as the three figures disappeared into the storm, the mountain swallowed the sound of their footsteps, carrying them into the next fight for survival. The world was on fire again. Not with flames, but with pursuit. By the time Caleb reached the old ranger outpost, the snow had turned to sleet, hissing through the branches. Every muscle in his body burned, and his arms trembled under Rex's weight. Maya stumbled beside him, her breath shallow and ragged, her small hand gripping his coat. The outpost loomed ahead, a half-collapsed structure buried beneath snowdrifts and pine needles. It had been years since Caleb had stood here, back when he built it as a temporary shelter for lost hikers. The roof sagged, the logs blackened by time, but the walls still stood. "Inside," he panted. They ducked through the warped doorway. The air was thick with dust and cold memory. Old tools hung from rusted nails. A faded map peeled off one wall. In the corner, a metal fuel drum sat half-buried under debris, still sealed. Caleb set Rex down gently on a torn sleeping bag. The shepherd groaned, his sides heaving, blood seeping through a reopened wound. "You stay with him," Caleb told Maya. "Don't move, no matter what you hear." She looked up, terrified. "What are you going to do?" "End this." There was no hesitation in his voice, just a tired, steady certainty. He moved through the cabin like a man possessed, quick, methodical, silent. His old ranger instincts guided every action. He grabbed a coil of wire, a box of old nails, and the fuel drum. His breath fogged in the air as he worked, rigging traps the way he'd once done for illegal trappers. Tripwires hidden under snow, cans tied to branches, crude alarms that would ring like gunfire when struck. When he was done, he poured a trail of fuel from the drum to the far wall, creating a thin, glistening line that snaked across the floor. The smell was sharp, burning his throat. Outside, engines growled through the forest. Headlights flickered between the trees, cold and bright. They were close. Caleb's pulse slowed. His breathing evened out. The old calm returned, the kind that came right before danger, before fire. He slipped out the back door and crouched low behind a fallen log. Through the veil of snow, he could see them. 4 men, maybe 5, moving through the trees with flashlights and rifles. Their breath came in white bursts, their boots crunching in unison. "There!" one shouted. "Tracks lead to that cabin." Caleb waited until they were close enough that he could see the whites of their eyes. Then he whispered to the wind, "Come on, you bastards." He stood, fired a single shot into the air, and disappeared behind the outpost. The men shouted, splitting into groups. One headed for the door, 2 circled around the side, the rest moving toward the snowmobiles near the ridge. The door burst open, and the first man stepped directly into Caleb's trap. The wire snapped taut, jerking the cans overhead. The sudden clatter echoed like thunder. "Get back!" one of them yelled. Too late. Caleb struck the match and tossed it into the fuel trail. The fire roared to life instantly, racing along the floor like a living thing, devouring the old wood in seconds. Flames licked up the walls, smoke billowing through cracks. The outpost became a furnace of light in the snow. The men stumbled back, shouting. One fired into the darkness. The gunshot cracked through the trees, then vanished under the roar of fire. Caleb moved fast, circling wide through the pines. He could see their snowmobiles parked by the ridge, dark shapes against white. He ducked low, grabbed the last of the fuel he'd carried, and splashed it over the machines. When he struck the flare, his face glowed red in the reflection of flame. He threw it, turned, and didn't look back. The explosion ripped through the valley, bright, violent, final. Snow erupted into the air, a wave of orange light swallowing the dark. The mountain answered with silence. When he stumbled back to the outpost, smoke curled into the night sky like a signal. The walls were half collapsed, flames dying down into smoldering ash. Maya stood at the doorway, clutching Rex's collar, eyes wide with terror. Caleb, I'm here, he rasped, his voice raw. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. He dropped to one knee and held her close, his body shaking with exhaustion. Rex limped over, pressing his head against Caleb's shoulder, as if to remind him they'd survived again. Behind them, the last embers flickered and died, leaving only the hiss of snow falling into the ashes. The fire had done its job. The men were gone, the tracks erased. But so was the cabin. Caleb looked down at Maya, her face smudged with soot, her eyes full of something between fear and faith, and felt a strange peace settle in his chest. "It's over," he said quietly. For the first time, he almost believed it. They walked for hours through the night, guided by the faint light of dawn bleeding into the horizon. The cold bit at their skin, but the wind had softened, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. By the time the sky turned pink, Caleb's legs threatened to give out. He carried Maya for the last stretch, Rex trotting beside them, limping but determined. At the crest of the ridge, they stopped. Below them, in the wide white valley, a faint sound drifted through the air. Sirens. Caleb let out a shaky laugh. They finally made it. He'd sent the signal hours ago, an emergency frequency on his old Ranger radio, broadcasting anonymously from the outpost just before it burned. The flashing lights grew closer, bouncing across the snow like tiny stars. When the rescue team reached them, Caleb handed Maya to a medic. The girl clung to his coat, crying. "No!" she sobbed. "Don't make me go! I want to stay with you, with Rex!" Caleb knelt, gripping her shoulders gently. "You need to go, Maya. They'll keep you safe now." "But you promised." He smiled, weary, broken, but kind. "And I kept it. You're safe." She shook her head, tears streaking her face. "I don't want a new family. I want this one." His throat tightened. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You already have it," he whispered. "It's right here." He touched her chest. "Doesn't matter where we are." The medic stepped forward, murmuring softly. Maya looked back over her shoulder as they led her toward the waiting truck. Rex whimpered, trying to follow, but Caleb held him back. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "We'll see her again." As the truck door closed and the sound of sirens faded into the morning, Caleb stood in the snow, the wind tugging at his coat, the first sunlight breaking through the clouds. The mountain was quiet again. He looked down at Rex, who leaned against his leg, still bleeding but alive. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's head. "We did it," he said softly. "We got her home." And as the valley filled with light, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Not really. The fire had taken his past, but in its ashes, something new had survived. Spring crept slowly into the Montana mountains, melting snow into silver streams and softening the air with pine and thawing earth. The old cabin stood unchanged, but inside, Caleb Turner was not the same. He no longer woke to hollow silence, only to memories. A child's laughter, paw scratches on the floor, warmth where there had once been cold. He was alone, but not punished. His solitude now felt like a promise kept. Each morning, he sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching sunlight spill over the peaks. Sometimes he imagined small footsteps echoing through the house, or the soft whine of his dog, Rex. The government letters said Maya was safe with a foster family, recovering. He'd read one, then tucked it away beside his late wife's ring. He didn't need updates. He'd seen the fire in Maya's eyes, the will to survive. And Rex, wounded but alive, was healing somewhere too. At night, the wind sometimes carried the faint jingle of a caller. He always looked, but never saw, until one April morning. An engine hummed up the valley road. Caleb stepped outside, heart tightening as a government SUV rolled to a stop. The door opened. Sunlight, motion, fur. "Rex?" The word broke from him. The shepherd bounded across the yard, golden coat gleaming, barking with joy as he crashed into Caleb's arms. Caleb dropped to his knees, laughing and crying. "You made it, boy." Then he heard a voice. "Caleb?" Maya stood by the car, taller, stronger, her hair in a braid. Her eyes were the same, brave, brown, alive. She took a step, then ran. He caught her, holding her as she sobbed into his chest. Rex circled them, tail thudding like a drumbeat of home. "You found your way back," Caleb whispered. "You promised we'd be safe," she said. "You didn't break your promise." The agent waiting by the car nodded respectfully. "She wanted to visit. We figured she earned that much." Caleb's eyes met his. "Thank you." Later, they sat on the porch, man, girl, and dog, wrapped in the scent of pine and sunlight. "Do you still live alone?" she asked. He smiled. "Not anymore." She laughed softly. "Remember what you told me? That when the world breaks you, you can still build something new." He nodded. "I meant it." They watched a hawk glide above the mountains, its shadow stretching long and light. For the first time in years, Caleb felt whole. The ghosts of his wife and son no longer haunted him. They simply watched, proud. He looked at Maya, then at Rex curled at his feet. This was survival, not the struggle, but the stillness after. He squeezed her hand. "You did good, kiddo." She smiled. "So did you." The mountains held their silence, vast, eternal, keeping their story. And Caleb finally understood. He hadn't just saved them. They had saved him too. Some stories stay with us because they remind us what love really looks like. Not the kind that needs words, but the kind you feel, in a quiet look, a wagging tail, a heartbeat sleeping beside your own. German shepherds have a way of teaching us that loyalty isn't just devotion, it's courage. It's standing between danger and the ones you love, even when it hurts. Caleb, Maya, and Rex's story isn't just about survival. It's about trust finding its way back after being lost. About how a dog's faith in us can rebuild the parts of life we thought were gone forever. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that wordless bond, that shared understanding, maybe this is your reminder to nurture it. Spend an extra walk together. Sit a little longer at the door when they lean against you. And if you'd like, I know of a wonderful place where you can learn more about deepening that connection. I'll leave it below. No rush, no pressure. Just something special for those who love as deeply as their dogs do. Because sometimes saving them isn't the miracle. Loving them is.